From the KPFK studios in Southern California,
it's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrove, and along with the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph. How are you doing today?
Very good. We have a great program coming up with the Green Party candidate for president.
That's correct. And if recent activity on our Facebook page is any indication, this is a very anticipated show in what we hope will be a series of interviews with presidential candidates before Election Day. We have sent invitations to all of the presidential candidates who have made it on enough state ballots to have a mathematical chance to win the presidency. That includes, of course, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and Libertarian Party candidate Gary Johnson. But first to accept our offer to engage with Ralph is Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein. Dr. Stein is a physician who graduated from Harvard Medical School and practiced internal medicine for 25 years in Massachusetts. In the 1990s, Dr. Stein became increasingly concerned about the links between illness and environmental toxins, especially exposures to lead, mercury, and dioxin contamination that comes from the burning of waste. She helped lead the fight to clean up coal plants in Massachusetts, then known as the Filthy Five. This ended up setting an example for how other states could raise the standards for their own coal plants. Her first foray into electropolitics was in 2002 when she was recruited by Green Rainbow Party activists to run for governor of Massachusetts against Mitt Romney. She's the co-author of two widely praised reports, In Harm's Way, Toxic Threats to Child Development, and Environmental Threats to Healthy Aging. She was the Green Party candidate for president in 2012, and again here in 2016. She joins us just before a rally at the University of Maine. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Dr. Jill Stein.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, Ralph. It's really an honor to be with you.
Well, I can say that you're my successor on the Green Party ticket, so I know a little bit about what you're going through, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear you out. You don't have to engage in sound bites here, as you may have experienced with some of the mass media. Let's start with a little background here. The Green Party is going to be on how many state ballots, Jill Stein?
It will be approximately 48. So we're currently on, I believe, 46, and I think we expect 2 more.
That's very good. That could be a high watermark for the Green Party in its history. What 2 states, I can only guess, aren't you going to be on because of horrendous obstacles to getting on the ballot?
I believe it's Oklahoma and South Dakota, and we're on as a write-in in North Dakota, in Georgia, and Indiana. So, it's the states which are, just have these insurmountable hurdles. We spent money, to augment our volunteer effort, but we are still largely a people-powered campaign. So we don't have whatever it is. I think it was like $30 million the Libertarians talk about that it cost them to get on the ballot. We don't have $30 million. We're a people-powered campaign. So where the states are dead set on suppressing political opposition, it's very hard to overcome that.
Right. Well, you're on the ballot for the states where our listeners are, overwhelmingly. Let's get to the next point, which is your platform, as I read it, and I'm going to summarize it, either has majoritarian support in this country or very close to majoritarian support. For example, you want a public works program dealing with public transit, sustainable agriculture, conservation, renewable energy. I think most people would like that. That probably comes in about 90%. They see their public works crumbling, services inadequate. They have libraries and schools and bridges and highways that have not been repaired. You also believe in a full employment policy. That was the majority Democratic Party policy in 1946. They actually passed a law to that effect. You want to end poverty, and when people see how relatively easy it is to end poverty, in one way is to increase the minimum wage. Catch-up, it's been frozen for so many years, $15 an hour minimum wage. That was one of the reasons why so many people flocked to Bernie Sanders' candidacy. Full Medicare for all, free choice of doctor and hospital. That comes in 60 to 70% without even further explanation. And if you ever explained it, given all the trouble people are having qualifying and not qualifying for all these healthcare so-called insurance plans, it would go up even higher. You want to do something about student debt, and that affects conservative and liberal students. That's going to be a majoritarian position. You want a global treaty to halt climate change that has teeth and end destructive energy extraction, ending police brutality and mass incarceration. There's a growing left-right support for criminal justice reform. I suppose the Green Party doesn't care for the anti-civil libertarian provisions of the notoriously named Patriot Act, invading privacy and being able to search your home and not tell you for 72 hours. I think most Americans are against illegal surveillance of their emails and telephone calls by the government. And I think most Americans are ready for waging peace and not just brutalizing our foreign policy, which is boomeranging against us. And you want to abolish corporate personhood. I think the more people learn that corporations are not people, that have all the equal rights and even more privileges and immunities than we have. So here we start out, Dr. Stein, with a majoritarian platform. We live in a two-party tyranny that doesn't believe in competition, can enforce it with penalties and obstructions, and they're getting closer and closer to being both one corporate party with two heads having different labels. So how do you explain to the American people why they don't vote their conscience enough and why they don't vote for majoritarian issues that you represent and which mostly are off the table by the Republican Democratic Party? Off the table, undiscussable.
Absolutely. I think we're at a really unique moment right now because the American people are waking up, to the fact that it is a race to the bottom between these two corporate parties that are sending jobs overseas, putting downward pressure on wages, starving people out of health care, locking an entire generation into unpayable predatory student loan debt. So, we're at a point now where we don't have to convince people how screwed they are. In my experience, what I'm hearing from people now is that they are just desperate to hear about something else. The two majority candidates right now, the Democratic and Republican candidates, Trump and Clinton, are the most disliked and untrusted presidential candidates in our history, with more than majority disapproval. At the same time, you have 76% of voters saying they want to open up the debates. They want to be able to hear about something else. It's rather remarkable. Donald Trump has had over $4 billion of free primetime media. Hillary's had over $2 billion worth. My campaign has had essentially zip, yet we are still pushing up around 5% in the polls, which is unprecedented for a non-corporate party without the big money to get the word out. We're getting out there simply by word of mouth, by networking among desperate people. The largest block of voters now has divorced the Democratic and Republican parties, which are now minority parties, and the plurality of voters now are independent. They're looking for something else. So, it's no surprise that the corporate media and many of the nonprofits that are dependent on the big money, they are not allowing our campaign, the real alternative, to see the light of day. So the key here, in my view, it's not having to change people's minds. It's just allowing them to know. In fact, I was in a debate, Ralph. I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you, but back in 2002, we fought our way into a governor's debate in Massachusetts where, this was televised, and I articulated our usual agenda: cut the military, put the dollars into true security here at home, provide health care as a human right, raise wages, which needed to be living wages, green our energy system, equal marriage. We were the only ones talking about it back in 2002. That agenda went over like a lead balloon inside of the little TV studio, which was just candidates and moderator. But when we walked out, I was mobbed by the press, who told me I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. Just in the course of an hour, people didn't need to be persuaded. They just needed to hear, oh my God, there is another plan here, which is about the public interest. So for me, that was like the lights went on. That was like the moment of revelation for me, that in fact, we are not the lunatic fringe. We really are. We represent the core of basic American community values. And the name of the game is getting the word out, and they are quaking in their boots, which of course is why they will not pass ranked choice voting. We could solve this problem of a divided vote or an unintended consequence of your vote through a voting system like what's used here in Maine, where I am right now. They've got it on the ballot for a statewide referendum.
Explain that.
It enables people.
Yeah, explain that.
Okay, go into the voting booth and you can rank your choices. So if your first choice is an underdog that might not win, you know that your choice number 2, which might be your lesser evil, your safety choice, your vote is automatically reassigned from your first choice to your second choice if your first choice loses and there's not a majority winner. So it essentially eliminates splitting. It eliminates having to vote your fear instead of your values. It allows us to actually bring a moral compass to our democracy. Democracy cannot function just on who do we fear the most, or who do we hate the most. We need an affirmative agenda. The fact that the Democrats will not allow this to be passed, and in fact, my campaign filed the bill back in 2002 in the Democratic legislature, 85% Democratic. They could have prevented any possibility of a split vote. And, it was a close vote. And the votes for me, might have made that difference. But turned out they didn't. The gap was bigger than the votes that I got. But in any event, they could have preempted any possibility bypassing ranked choice voting. They refused. The fact that they refused is very revealing. It tells you they rely on intimidation and fear in order to gain your vote. And the fact that they rely on fear tells you they are not your friend and do not deserve your vote in the first place.
Worse than that, worse than relying on fear, is they're excluding you from the seat at the table. One of the ways they exclude you is what you just said, instant runoff voting. They always talk about spoilers, a political bigoted word that should be called that. It's only aimed at third-party candidates, never at each other with the major parties. And they got an opportunity to deal with that with instant runoff voting, and they don't. Let's run through the various ways they're trying to marginalize the Green Party and even the Libertarian Party. One way is to keep you off the mass media. In 2004, Professor Stephen Farnsworth put out a report saying that I got about 5 minutes on all the networks after Labor Day to Election Day. Only 5 minutes, even though I, like you, were representing majoritarian issues. Okay, so have you gotten any time on the following? The national CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox News.
Media Research Center just put out a report like last week. And what they showed was that I've gotten 3 seconds worth of coverage on major media evening news. Gary Johnson has had 11 seconds, and Donald Trump has had approximately 35,000 times as much coverage. Hillary Clinton, about 20,000 times as much coverage.
And these networks are using public property, the public airwaves. All right, the next question is, how about the cable shows? Let's talk about the so-called liberal MSNBC. Have you been on any of those shows? Chris Matthews, Chris Hayes, Larry O'Donnell, any of these shows and others on MSNBC?
None of the major shows.
Okay, let's go to the radio now. Have you been on NPR?
Briefly, yes. I was on Tom Ashbrook. I did have 1 hour on Tom Ashbrook, and that's about it.
Okay. Have you had any C-SPAN coverage?
Yes. C-SPAN covered our major events. They covered the convention, and they covered our announcement.
Yes, they were very good in presidential campaigns. That's why they're trusted. How about the following shows? Charlie Rose on PBS, Diane Rehm, Radio, NPR, Terry Gross, NPR. And have you been on those shows?
I had approximately a 10-minute segment on Diane Rehm. That's all.
Well, that's more than I got. The point here, Jill Stein, is, and I'll make it in a personal way, over 80% of the people when I ran for president knew about me. But then I realized that when I was running, 80% of the people didn't even know I was running. So you see that gap is exactly how they can marginalize and exclude people from giving the voters more voices and choices. All right, the third way they block competition and continue the two-party duopoly is with the phony name called the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is a non-profit corporation created by the Republican Democratic parties, as you know, in 1987 to get rid of the League of Women Voters' supervision of debates. And it is funded by corporations. The debates are greased by companies like Ford Motor Company, AT&T, Anheuser-Busch. And except for letting Ross Perot on in 1992, they haven't let anybody on. And they get the cooperation of these networks who make money from the ratings to keep everybody off. Now, have there been any polls asking the American people whether they want you, the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, or Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party candidate, on those debates? In 2004, 2002, a majority of people wanted me and Buchanan on the debates in 2000 and me on the debates in 2004. Have there been any polls?
Yes, and the numbers have gone up from where they were when you were running. It's now 76% of the American public that says they want Gary Johnson and myself included in these debates.
So there you are. What's happening is that the will of the people, the declared opinion of the people who want more agendas, more ideas, more sensible redirections and reforms in our country, are being thwarted by the mechanism of keeping third-party candidates who are on more than enough states, theoretically, to get an electoral vote majority, to keep them off the mass media, the commercial media, to keep them off the debates. Now, unless you have billions of dollars, it's impossible to reach tens of millions of American people, no matter how hard you campaign, and you've been campaigning nonstop, Jill Stein. So if you're kept off the debates, you can't reach more than 2% of the people, even if you campaign in every state and fill the big conventions like Madison Square Garden. So it is basically a strategy to destroy the essence of democracy, which is the competitiveness and choices of candidates on the ballot. Now, you have been on Democracy Now!, haven't you?
Yes, we've had good coverage. And, let me just add to what you said about the commission, the fake commission, a very public and official sounding name of the League of Women Voters, quit after the two corporate parties took over this commission, and they quit saying that this is a fraud being perpetrated on the American voter. There's the pretense that this is official when it's actually the two parties who are colluding in order to silence political opposition. This is true two-party tyranny, and it locks people in, especially outrageous at this time that people feel like they are being thrown under the bus by these two political parties and are demanding, other options in large numbers.
Let's get back to the debates. The first debate, which you're excluded from, Dr. Jill Stein and Gary Johnson as well, is September 26th, coming up fast at Hofstra College in Long Island. And then they have two more debates at the presidential level and one at the vice presidential level. I wonder why they're rationing debates. You want to talk about people wanting more debates at this stage of the election? It's probably 95%. What are you going to do about the Hofstra debate? Are you going to go there?
Yes, I'm going there. We now have over 100,000 people who are signed up on our campaign and our petition to open up the debates. And we're encouraging people to come and to join us and to insist that we need to be included. So exactly what the plans are at Hofstra, we will be advising people as the time gets closer. But we are not just going to go quietly into this dark night. In this election, we are not just deciding what kind of a world we will be, but arguably whether we will have a world or not going forward. If my campaign is not in the debate, we will not have a real discussion of the emergency of climate change and why, in fact, we need a Green New Deal type national mobilization at the scale of a wartime mobilization in order to address this emergency. If my campaign is not in the debate, we will not be talking about how we really fix this problem of endless and expanding war, why we need to cut the military budget by 50%, why we need to bring back our troops scattered overseas, the police force of the world, in over 100 countries, something like 800 bases, but who's counting? Why we need to basically bring those troops home, and why we need to stop this policy of regime change, these wars on terror, which only create more terror. This needs to be debated. And a third issue, Ralph, that is potentially putting us all in the target hairs now is the reactivation of a new nuclear arms race. This arms race and this Cold War is potentially hotter than it's been at any time in my lifetime, and we have 2,000 nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert right now, and Hillary Clinton wants to start an air war with Russia, a nuclear armed power, over Syria as the means of addressing ISIS and the crisis in Syria. This kind of stuff, the nuclear weapons, needs to be on the table, and it won't be if I'm not in the debate.
That's true, because both Trump and Hillary want bigger military budgets, and Hillary supports President Obama's $1 trillion expenditure to so-called upgrade nuclear weapons. President Eisenhower warned us, 5-star general.
Right.
He said, watch out for the military-industrial complex as a threat to our freedom and to our economy. And what we have now is a gigantic taxpayer-draining empire that is devouring itself. It's, as you say, it's creating more resistance, more fighting against us overseas. The threats are coming to this country, which will, of course, increase the massive industry known as the anti-terrorism industry and crush our civil liberties and civil rights. And it's devouring our priorities here in communities all over the country, which are in such disrepair and are so neglected in terms of public works and public services. In the meantime, the big corporations are fleeing America for tax havens in places like Ireland and Luxembourg and the Grand Cayman Islands. The rich are finding more tax loopholes to expect. So when are the people going to basically roll up their sleeves and say, we've had enough, we're going to recapture Congress? As you know, Jill, a lot of progressives, they have great agendas and they have great solutions, but they don't pay enough attention to recapturing Congress. And recapturing Congress, 535 men and women who put their shoes on every day like you and I, is the key to begin turning this whole process around. And I hear people who are worried about climate change tell me, oh, Congress, that's gridlock. That's not where the action is. Hello, that's where the action is. When I go up there, I see coal lobbyists, oil lobbyists, natural gas lobbyists, nuclear power lobbyists. Somehow they think that's where the action is in Congress. So I want to ask you this question. How do you read the Bernie movement, the Bernie Sanders movement, before and after he endorsed Hillary Clinton, without qualifications, I might add, and how is it going to help you? So how do you read before, after, and how is it going to help you?
Well, let me just say that on the day that Bernie endorsed Hillary, the floodgates opened into our campaign. Our fundraising went up about 1,000%, and that's largely been sustained. Our Facebook went off the charts, and volunteers poured into our campaigns and actually helped us achieve the ballot access status that we have now on the ballot in just about 48 states. And this has continued. So Bernie is a team player. He made it known from the very start that he would be supporting the Democratic nominee, presumably Hillary Clinton. And what we learned in the course of Bernie's campaign is that you cannot have a revolutionary campaign in a counter-revolutionary party. The party pulled out its kill switch against Bernie and sabotaged him, as we saw from the emails revealed showing the collusion between the Democratic National Committee, Hillary's campaign, and members of the corporate media. And it wasn't the first time. This happened to Dennis Kucinich. It happened to Jesse Jackson. They did it even to Howard Dean, creating the Dean Screen. This is how they work, and it's been a huge wake-up moment. And Bernie's campaign was very principled in most regards. I think, he certainly didn't go far enough in questioning the military policy, the military-industrial complex, and so on. But, I think that's the price you pay for being in the Democratic Party, and Bernie has to pay that price. If he were liberated from the Democratic Party, it might be a whole new ballgame. As he said himself, it's a movement, not a man, and that movement continues to move into our campaign. It's going strong. I think it's a marriage made in heaven. The Green Party provides the infrastructure, kind of the culture of watchdogging the electoral bureaucracy and how you participate, how you get on the ballot, stuff like that, which is very difficult to do unless you have billions of dollars. So with the passion and the vision of the burners coming into the Greens, we call it Burning Green. And the events that I'm going to that are being created around the country right now, it's the Bernie folks who are showing up in huge numbers along with the traditional Greens. It's very powerful. There's one other element I just want to be sure to mention here. That is that there are 43 million young people who are locked into predatory student loan debt for whom there is no way out in the foreseeable future given the economy that we have, this predatory Wall Street-driven, financialized, low-wage service industry economy. The jobs that have come back have been extremely insecure, low-wage, benefit-poor, temporary jobs. Young people are screwed. They don't have a way to pay off this debt. And when they discover that they could come out and vote Green to cancel that debt, that I am the one candidate who will bail out the students like we bailed out the crooks on Wall Street, then it becomes an irresistible motivation to actually come out and vote Green. And I just want to note that 43 million young people in debt is enough to win a three-way presidential race. So when they tell us that resistance is futile, just remember that is the toxic Kool-Aid. That is the propaganda that they're trying to use to keep people from self-mobilizing. Right. And if ever there was a mobilizing entity, it is the millennial generation.
Yes.
So just we have the power to turn out and even win this race, not to split the vote, but to flip the vote.
You know, we're trying to convey how much easier it is than most people think, especially young people, to turn the country around if they focus on the levers, if they focus on Congress and state legislatures. If 100 people in each congressional district started a Congress watchdog club with a letterhead and a summons to the members of Congress to come to town meetings, even just 100 people out of 690,000 people in each congressional district, they will begin to feel their power and feel how if they go to 200, 500, 700, how they can challenge these corporations that control a majority of the members of Congress, even though they don't have any vote. We're the ones that have the vote. So we have to convey the sense that in American history, it's always been a few people that started movements against slavery, women's right to vote, the farmer labor revolutions in the late 19th century. And always third parties have been first. Jill Stein, as you say to your own audiences, they have been first with the great issues way before the two major parties. They were first to recommend a Social Security program, a Medicare program. They were first to push for a 40-hour week, for progressive taxation. And that's one reason why they are discriminated against and repressed, is because they want to shift power from the few to the many. So why don't you give the website? I'm sure our listeners are saying, how do we get in touch? How do we become part of this justice movement?
Great. So go to Jill2016.com, or on social media, go to Dr. Jill Stein, and that's Dr. no period, and join the team because we're here for the long haul. And, you know, in the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it just to look at the power of fighting student debt, or 25 million Latinos who've learned that the Republicans are the party of hate and fear, but Democrats are the party of deportation and detention. We have all the numbers we need to turn this system on its head. The anti-slavery parties were also called spoilers, including the Republican Party that went on not just to abolish slavery, but to actually take over the presidency, moving very quickly from a third party into the presidency. At a time of great social upheaval, all things are possible. We must challenge, as Ralph is saying, you know, to fight at every level, including Congress, and to make that challenge political and to organize as a political party is how we get traction. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. We must be that demand. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Don't let them talk you out of your part.
So that's your opening statement if you're on the presidential debates at Hofstra on September 26th. Let's get your view on the two major candidates. Let's start with a question that I have to you about Donald Trump. He has made every mistake possible, any one of which would have destroyed his candidacy if he was an ordinary candidate. He has been a bigot against Hispanic Americans, Muslim Americans. He wants to build the wall. He engages in repeated daily factual misstatements where even people on Fox News have to follow up and correct his false statements again and again, and he never corrects them himself. He's cheated about everything and everybody he's dealt with. He's cheated against his workers, his consumers, Trump University, that fraud. He's cheated against his small business suppliers. He's cheated against his investors with his bankruptcies. He's cheated against his creditors. He even has boasted about cheating against his matrimony, and he's cheated against taxpayers by being a corporate welfare king and not paying any taxes, refuses to disclose his tax returns, which would show all kinds of interrelations that might lead to his disapproval by people. Now, given all that, and given the so-called conservative values of his supporters, why is he now surging on Hillary Clinton? The latest poll, he's 5 points ahead in Ohio. He's almost tied in Florida, when a few weeks ago he was 10 points or more behind. What does this say, first, about the voters who are supporting him? And what does this say about the media that is replaying, as you say, billions of dollars of free propaganda by him? What does it say about the Trump movement?
Well, as Bernie Sanders himself said, the Trump movement reflects the economic despair and misery that's been inflicted not only on the American people, but people around the world, as we have been subject to globalization and financialization and austerity, and workers have been thrown under the bus while the 1% is rolling in dough. So, the way that you address this right-wing extremism is actually by putting forward a truly progressive agenda. That's the only solution here. And the economic misery, who passed NAFTA? Bill Clinton signed that with Hillary's support. Who passed Wall Street deregulation that enabled the meltdown of Wall Street and the disappearance of 9 million jobs, the theft of 5 million homes? We have Democratic centrists here to blame for the economic conditions driving this right-wing extremism. So the solution here, is not Hillary Clinton and more of the Clintonism centrist, the centrist Clinton philosophy that is breeding this economic misery. But let me put this another way. Polls show that the majority of Trump supporters don't actually support Donald Trump. They actually dislike Hillary Clinton. They're looking for something else. So what we need to do is to give them something else. And in terms of the role of the media, that is my candidacy, which does provide that truly progressive agenda that gets to the heart of what is driving this right-wing extremism. It's not just Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton is not going to be the solution here. She's going to be more of what is driving this incredible economic insecurity and this shift to the right. The media factor was summed up by the CEO of, I think it was CBS, who said, Donald Trump may be bad for the country, but he sure is good for our bottom line. And it reflects, Ralph, I think, how important it is, what you've said before, that it's time to use the antitrust laws and to break up this conglomerate corporate media that has now poisoned our democracy to the point that our very survival is at risk for the kinds of monstrosities that are flourishing in our corporate media-dominated discussion.
It's amazing how the media has degraded itself to the level of the Republican primary scurrilous back and forth. And the media, I keep telling people in the mass media, you've got a privileged position in the First Amendment, and you should have a higher estimate of your own significance and not just be ditto heads for political scum and political slander and insubstantial presentations. Hillary has been seen by the commentators as one of the reasons, as you say, her weakness as a candidate, her duplicity, her untrustworthiness, her more Wall Street and more war. You could have a button with a nice picture of Hillary in the middle, and on the top is more war, and on the bottom is more Wall Street, and you'll be very prophetic. She just can't disentangle herself from those two. She gave Bernie Sanders a few slogans in order to mimic him, but she's back again becoming more aggressive overseas than even Obama, and she scares the generals. So we're at a very, very serious point, as you've said, around the country, Jill. In this country, I know every 4 years they say serious point, but when you've got these two candidates, all of whom want more militarism and more corporate power, and who knows what else Trump wants. He takes everything personally. I can see him attacking a country whose leader insulted him. He has no self-control. He has no impulse self-control. He has a very serious personality defect on that. And so here we are. We have a few weeks left for the election, and people have got to rally at Hofstra. You want to go and rally at Hofstra. A lot of people in the New York City area on September 26th, Monday, September 26th, the first presidential debate. The media is going to all be there. If there are 20, 50, 100,000 people there saying, open up the debates for the third parties, I think that will begin getting the attention of the mass media. So I urge listeners in the greater New York City area to go to these peaceful rallies and with your placards and make your demands known, because the press is all there. You go where the press is. What do you say, Joe?
Yes, definitely. This is where the American people are. This is what we demand. Over 3/4 of the American people are saying it's time to open up the debate. We have rejected these two candidates at the highest levels of disapproval in our history. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture is that Americans not only have a right to vote, we have a right to know who we can vote for. It's time to override this fraud being committed on the American voter of the two-party tyranny of this private corporation of the Commission on Presidential Debates. We, the voters, demand the right to be in charge here, to be informed, and to be empowered. And let me add that at this moment, we are seeing before our very eyes a political realignment. We've seen the Republican Party come apart at the seams, with Donald Trump taking the remnants over the cliff. We've seen the basic foundation of the Republican Party move into the Democratic Party inside of Hillary's campaign, and you have endorsements, everyone from Meg Whitman to the neocon John Negroponte and others who are all saying, we're with Hillary now. So we've got a big, happy, one corporate family now, uniting the corporate Democrats and the corporate Republicans. The people of integrity inside the Bernie's campaign have split off and are unifying with the Greens. So this is actually a transformative political moment. That realignment that has been in the works here for quite some time is happening.
As I was saying, half of democracy is showing up, and people have got not only to agree with the agenda of some of these third parties' listeners, they've got to show up. People have got to show up, showing up at meetings, rallies, marches, city council, courtrooms. You've got to show up. We have a Democratic Party that cannot defend the American people from the worst Republican Party in history, because it's a Democratic Party of war and Wall Street. And we have two parties who are basically hijacking our country for their corporate paymasters. And if we focus on 535 members of Congress, that's not all that many, we're going to see a fast turnaround. So focus all your concerns, all the information, the kind of agenda the Green Party had. Turn it right on your senators and representatives. So I want to have Steve. Steve wants to ask the question, Joe.
Dr. Stein, talk a little bit about your vice presidential running mate, Jamu Baraka. Who is he, and how does he complement you as a candidate?
Great. So Jamu Baraka is a human rights advocate and an international human rights advocate who's been defending racial justice, economic justice, worker justice, indigenous justice, and justice for Black and brown people all over the world and in the United States, has been helping to lead the charge against the death penalty here, and is an extremely eloquent and empowering person. And one of the greatest things about running with him is that we speak to all of America. He comes out of the tradition of the African American intellectuals, the people who've really been standing up for African American rights and economic rights and workers' rights. And because he speaks in the language of his community and makes no bones about it, he really invites in a whole new demographic of voters who've been locked out, of African American and Black and brown people and indigenous people who have felt like this system had no place for them. And he is unapologetic about standing up for the rights of oppressed people and against colonialism and against imperialism. And he's very inspirational, and it is so much fun to be out there on the campaign trail with him, because who comes out is totally different from anything I have seen before in progressive campaigns.
Also,
because he is so empowering and inspiring.
when I've heard him, he talks in a very calm voice, too. He talks in a very steady, calm voice, full of facts. Now, as we close, Jill Stein, the presidential candidate for the Green Party, tell our listeners how they can get to read your agenda, how they can get to your website, and say it slowly and twice.
Okay, so again, the website is jill2016.com. That's jill2016.com. And our social media is Dr. Jill Stein, and that's Dr., no period, Dr. Jill Stein, all one word. And you can see our media appearances as well as connect to our Power to the People agenda, our Green New Deal, our plan to abolish student debt, and our plan to actually create a whole new foreign policy based on international law and human rights. That means we don't supply $100 billion worth of weapons to the war criminals in Saudi Arabia, nor do we supply $8 million a day to the Israeli army that is also violating international law and human rights. So there are real solutions right now for us. If we stand up with the courage of our convictions, there is no stopping us. So join the team. Come out to Hofstra again on September 26th, and let's begin to take our democracy back. We are in the target hairs in this election. We are all asking whether we are going to have a world at all or not going forward. If we are going to save our hives, we need to start with democracy. Democracy needs to start with an open presidential debate. So come on out and let's take back the promise of our democracy.
And listeners, you can call your local newspaper, your local TV, radio station, say, why aren't they putting third-party candidates on? Call NPR, call PBS. Why aren't they putting third-party candidates on? You had an experience recently with Judy Woodruff of PBS. Can you explain that to our listeners? This is Public Broadcasting System, Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour.
That's right. I had a taped interview, which was approximately 6 or 7 minutes long, and it was actually posted, I think it was live streamed, in fact, on Facebook. And then it was played on the NewsHour that night. And some of our astute watchdog supporters compared the two, and they discovered that some of my most important statements critiquing Hillary Clinton and why she is not going to save our hides, whether it was her war policy or her shipping our jobs overseas with NAFTA, her history of dismantling the social safety net and supporting the destruction of aid to families with dependent children, putting millions more children and families into poverty. You know, I told some hard truths about Hillary Clinton and why the lesser evil is not okay. That apparently my discussion of Hillary Clinton was cut out, and also my discussion about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and why it is an absolute betrayal of our democratic sovereignty and why it must be stopped, and why anybody supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership is essentially betraying the basic principles of democracy. So those two discussions were cut out of the PBS broadcast, which essentially took the teeth out of it. So, yeah, I think PBS needs to have us on again for a longer segment, in fact, so that we can tell the whole truth.
What's interesting is this election year has made the citizen groups off limits. All these citizen groups, local, state, national, that really do things and improve the country, they're never asked to be in these electoral campaign discussions. It's all these pundits, all these consultants, and the candidates as if they're in a bubble, leaving democracy off limits. Now, when you campaign around the country, Jill Stein, you connect with local issues. You connect with local citizen groups, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And, we're not out holding fundraisers in the Hamptons or in Beverly Hills. My running mate, John Mubaraka, was out camping out with the homeless in Baltimore last night. We were both recently at the Standing Rock Sioux encampment, where in fact we are both now, a warrant is out for our arrest for participating in civil disobedience to support this very critical stand being taken on behalf of our water, on behalf of human rights, on behalf of our climate. We were out there with the people whose homes were flooded out in southern Louisiana. We are out there on the front lines with everyday people fighting the real frontline battles that real Americans are fighting. And let me support what you just said, Ralph, about everyday Americans really having the power here. People may remember, or you may have heard if you weren't there, during the Nixon years, we have one of the worst precedents ever on record, but we, the American people, had the sense of our own power. We were in the driver's seat. We forced Richard Nixon and the Congress to establish, and thanks to your leadership, Ralph, we supported you, and we got the Environmental Protection Act and agency. We ended the war in Vietnam and brought the troops home. We got OSHA established with your leadership. We got the Supreme Court. We pressured the Supreme Court into supporting women's right to choose. So there should be just no end to what we can do when we operate with the courage of our convictions and we get out there in the street, in the voting booth, we assert our power and we take our democracy back. And I'm getting the sign now from my campaign that we are about to run into our next event here at the University of Maine in Orono. So I will have to bid you adieu, but it has been really wonderful and inspiring, as always, talking with you, Ralph, and you, Steve, and I just so greatly appreciate. In fact, I give you credit, or perhaps blame, for my candidacy from the very start. You have been the inspiration to me to get involved with politics, someone who was not politically active for the first 50 years of my life. I think for the next 50 years, I'm not going to be able to stop because of the light that you shined for me and so many millions of Americans. You may have been ahead of the curve, but the curve is catching up to you, Ralph Nader, right now in a big way. So we can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jill Stein. We've been talking with the Green Party presidential candidate. She is at Orono, Maine, as we record this interview. And she'll be at Hofstra on Monday, September 26th, for the big first presidential debate. And we're looking for a huge peaceful protest when the eyes of the mass media are focused on that location. Thank you very much, Jill Stein.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Take care. All the best.
We have been speaking with Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein. For more information on her candidacy, go to Jill2016.com. We will also link to it on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website. We have a little time left, so let's take a short break, check in with corporate crime reporter Russell Mokhiber, then come back and do some listener questions. You're listening to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Take it away, Russell.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, September 16, 2016. I'm Russell Mokhiber. In an emergency, a blocked exit can be the difference between life and death for employees and customers alike. Yet Dollar General, one of the nation's largest discount retailers, continues to ignore federal workplace safety inspectors who have found repeated instances where the company allows stacked merchandise to block exit routes. Since 2010, OSHA has found more than 100 safety and health violations at Dollar General stores nationwide. Headquartered in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, the company operates more than 12,000 stores in 43 states and employs about 100,000 workers. In fiscal 2015, the retailer recorded sales of $20 billion. In an emergency, every second matters, said Bill McDonald of OSHA. Neither workers nor customers should have to fight their way through piles of merchandise to exit a building safely. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Ralph, we have time for a couple of questions. And this first one sort of touches on something that you spoke with Jill Stein about towards the end of her interview, which is the TPP. And listener Sandy Hinden asks, and this is a question I've asked over and over again, too, of many different people, what is Barack Obama's inner motivation for supporting the TPP? Why does he ignore its critics? He has created so many enemies among people who voted for him.
Well, that's always a puzzle for us, and here's my observations. First, he's a globalist. Once you say that global interdependence is a fact and it cannot be resisted with community self-reliance, then you move to the next logical stage, which is these trade agreements. Number two, I don't think he understands one part of the trade agreement that takes up more pages than actually tariffs and quotas, and that is the subordination of environment, consumer, and worker protections to the imperatives of commercial trade. So therefore, each country that wants to be first in consumer protection in this way, in that way, environment, worker safety, bumps up against this clause that says you better be careful, because if you have strong labeling laws for food, if you want to push a certain auto safety feature, if you want to get a certain chemical off the market, you can be accused by any of the other 160 countries of erecting a non-tariff trade barrier. And if they accuse, say, our country with the non-tariff trade barrier, that is an advance for consumers, workers, environment, they take us to secret tribunals run by corporate trade lawyers who are on the job as judges. Can you imagine a conflict of interest? All in secret to bypass our laws. Now, Obama refuses to recognize that. He refuses to answer Senator Elizabeth Warren's criticism, other by saying she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'd wager that Barack Obama has not read the latest text completely of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because he's supposed to be a lawyer and a constitutional law teacher and a community organizer. And this is just the opposite. It circumvents our constitutional rights, our consumer laws, our courts, our regulatory agencies, just the way NAFTA did, just the way the World Trade Organization did, only the TPP is worse. It allows the drug companies to increase the price of their medicines here much higher than overseas, and does not protect American industry and commerce, because the big multinationals, they want to open the doors to low-wage third world countries where they can get their way by polluting and escape accountability. So they have no patriotism toward this country, these U.S. corporate multinationals. And now, it's unfortunate that none of the reporters can ever get to them on the point that I made. None of the reporters can even understand the area in the TPP. They can go to globaltradewatch.org and get all the material page by page, led by Lori Wallach, but they don't do that. They don't do their homework. And so it took Bernie Sanders and Trump, of all people, to simplify it in terms of abandoning industries and jobs in this country to third world countries to make it into a political issue. But the details are devastating to President Obama's position. The other thing is he's hung up on this legacy, Steve. You know, he wants legacies, and he sees the TPP as a legacy. And on his behalf, his argument is that there are protections for workers and environment, but what he doesn't recognize is they're almost unenforceable. There isn't no enforcement mechanism for the non-trade protections that should be put in place to protect all countries and all peoples in their workplace, environment, and marketplace.
Well, Ralph, when I hear him talk about it, he's also talking about it in geopolitical terms. It always seems like it's a national security issue. The term I think I hear a lot is bulwark against China.
Yes.
Is there any efficacy to that?
Yeah, that's his rationale. They try to turn trade agreements into national security arguments. And that's really dishonest, because if you are going to say the TPP going into effect will increase the U.S. military and political influence in the Far East, that is sabotaging the purpose of any trade agreement, which should have nothing to do with those two proposals. Political influence in East Asia, the pivot to Asia, and the U.S. military presence. He keeps saying, if we don't write the rules, China's going to write the rules. What nonsense. First of all, China belongs to the World Trade Organization, so they're supposed to be under those rules. And second, as we speak, they're engaging in bilateral agreements with Asian countries on their periphery. So I think this is one of Barack Obama's most dishonest positions, is pushing for the TPP. And I don't think he's going to get it through after the election, in the session after the election, the so-called lame duck session. He's pushing, his corporate supporters are pushing, but I think the Bernie Sanders-Trump rousing of the public are going to make it very difficult to get through or even to have a vote. And if it doesn't get through in the lame duck session, it's gone for the new Congress. You don't have to worry about the TPP in this format.
Well, thank you for that question, Sandy. Keep them coming either on Ralph's Facebook page or on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website. That's our show. It was a great show. I want to thank once again the Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein for joining us. Go to jill2016.com for more information on her candidacy. And remember to sign up for the latest Breaking Through Power conference that will be taking place September 26th through the 29th. For more information, go to breakingthroughpower.org. For Ralph's weekly blog, go to nader.org. For more from Russell Mulcahy, go to corporatecrimereporter.com. Remember to visit Country's Only Law Museum, the American Museum of Tort Law in Winsted, Connecticut. Go to tortmuseum.org. The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt and Matthew Marin. Our executive producers, Alan Minsky. Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour when we will be talking about the Breaking Through Power Conference. Talk to you then, Ralph.
Thank you very much. And people, vote your conscience in an informed way. Don't succumb to the two-party tyranny.
Say you're tired of trying. You say we have no choice. Say you're just one person, and who will hear your voice? Don't let them fool you. You have the power in your hand. I'm only trying to school you.